Hello and welcome to this episode of the SDI podcast. My name is Scarlett, Industry Analyst at SDI. My guest on this podcast was Hannah Price from TOPdesk, and we spoke about some really interesting stuff surrounding gender equality in tech and in ITSM, and we spoke about some of our experiences being women in the industry, and that included some of the struggles and the barriers we face and a lot of women can face, but it also included some of the great things and what we like most about being women in tech. We also spoke a bit about the perceptions of the industry and how that can put women off wanting to pursue careers in tech and the ways that we can overcome this. We had a really great conversation and we talked about so many different things, and I really hope you enjoy this podcast. So without any further ado, let's get into it. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the SDI podcast. My guest today is Hannah Price, who is Service Management Consultant at TOPdesk. How are you today, Hannah?
I'm very good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining me. So we're going to be talking about gender equality today, which is a topic that's very close to my heart and I'm sure to yours. But outside of that, what are your sort of passions in your day-to-day job?
As you said already, I'm a consultant for TOPdesk, so mainly that involves a lot of travelling around, visiting different companies and organisations and helping them set up their TOPdesk or improve a process, or it can be very different each day. But my particular passion within that is I really like the knowledge management side, particularly KCS, and looking at how we can help different people improve the way they hold and retain knowledge. So yeah, no 2 days are the same.
Yeah. We had you at one of our knowledge management events recently,
yes.
And your presentation was really good, I have to say. It's definitely inspiring, and the way you explain how knowledge is intangible, it really resonated with me, and it's quite inspiring to see, especially women in the space talking about these sorts of topics. So can you tell us a bit more about your background?
Well, my background, with many women within tech, it seems, is not really anything to do with technology or IT at all. Mm-hmm. I kind of fell into this career whilst doing a part-time job with my current employer, TOPdesk, at the moment, and it really grew from there. Before I'd studied biochemistry and intellectual property law, didn't really know what I wanted to do, and then fell into tech and really ended up enjoying it much more than I ever thought I would. So a bit of an unusual journey there, but not too dissimilar from a lot of women in the tech industry, I think.
Yeah, my background was I studied history and politics.
Oh, really?
And politics is something I've always wanted to get into. And then I started as a researcher here, and now I'm here. I've literally fallen into it. But yeah, as you said, there's a lot of women out there that have a similar story. I can't remember the exact percentage, but it is quite significant. I think it's over 50%. What are your sort of experiences with being a woman in the industry, particularly a woman who didn't study to be in this industry or didn't plan to be here?
It's interesting because I've had a lot of positive experiences from being a woman in the industry, but every now and again there are the odd negative ones as well. It's partly to do with, it could potentially be the industry itself, but also my particular role. And sometimes I think my age as well comes into it, in that I'll be going to companies to help them and give them advice. And sometimes if they are a particular kind of spectrum of people who are of a certain age, predominantly male as well, I sometimes find, they can be a little bit unwilling to take that advice sometimes. Not all the time, but every now and again there are those little undertones which can stand out. So you do have to be a little bit careful sometimes in the way that you word things or the way that you come across. So it does come across sometimes, but not too much.
So something I know a lot of women struggle with is imposter syndrome, and as both of us have kind of fallen into our careers, I know I certainly struggle a lot with it. And do you have any experiences with imposter syndrome?
Oh, massively. I'd say there probably isn't a single day where I don't feel like a little bit of an imposter in what I'm doing, even if it's being here on a podcast. I kind of feel like, oh, why would they ask me to do that, or I'm the right person to talk to about it. On a day-to-day, if it's going to a client to do some process work or work on TOPdesk, it's just that feeling really of you're stepping into the room and it's mostly men in suits, and as a non-man not in a suit, it adds to that feeling of feeling like the odd one out, so to speak. And it's something that I personally do struggle with quite a lot, and I think a lot of my peers do as well. I haven't really got any good advice on how to help with it, really. It's something that I still, I'm trying to work on personally, other than just keep sitting at those tables, and even though you might feel that way internally, just sit there anyway. It's not going to hurt to be there. If anything, it's going to benefit everybody in the room, not just yourself. And you're always learning in those sorts of situations as well. But I think it's something a lot of people do struggle with.
Yeah. I guess it's a fake it till you make it
thing. Exactly.
And learning how to navigate those sorts of environments is quite difficult as well.
Yes.
Like networking events, for example, if it's something that's in the evening and there could be drinking involved, for example, that I've read that a lot of women are put off by that sort of environment because they might have childcare, they might have other responsibilities. So already men who are more likely to go to those events have an advantage of being able to network. And I think that really disadvantages women, not just from a networking standpoint, but also from feeling like they belong.
Absolutely. It's like it's almost like a bit of a clique in a way, isn't it? Or I've heard the phrase used before with an IT that's a bit of an old boys club. You can almost imagine them in their little smoking room, and it's somewhere where you would feel, oh, you're not allowed in there. Whether it's to the drinks, whether maybe everybody knows each other, or it can be quite, you don't want to put yourself out there in those sorts of situations.
So what are some of the good experiences you've had?
Good experiences is that a lot of the time, or especially where I'm employed, I'm very lucky at TOPdesk. The gender doesn't really come into it. We've got a great diverse range of people working at the company, and we've always had equal opportunities and really been encouraged to kind of like push myself as much as possible, as is everyone regardless of gender. But and that's kind of like part of the culture really at TOPdesk. But sometimes if you go to other places, especially within IT, there is this stereotype. It's quite a kind of male-led industry, and sometimes if I go somewhere else and I haven't, it can be a slight culture shock sometimes. They're like, oh yeah, this is different to where I go into the office. I do need to like work a little bit harder to make my voice heard, or think a little bit more to stand out, or to get a little bit of respect or credibility perhaps, whereas if I was at home in the office, I might not have to take those steps, so to speak. So
yeah, it's sort of the same at SDI. We're not really a tech company. We're more business services in a tech space. So our office is actually predominantly female. But going to conferences and things like that, you definitely feel outnumbered.
Yes.
And that can be really intimidating for a lot of women, especially as you and I both do speaking sessions. And standing in front of a room where it's mostly men, you do sort of feel like, am I going to be taken seriously? Which hopefully will change in time. But that's one of the barriers that we face. But have you got any others that you think that not necessarily yourself, but a lot of other women might face?
I think you have a barrier. Sometimes you mentioned respect already, but that barrier of seeming credible. When you're in front of that group, and that what you're saying really has come from somewhere where you've had a certain amount of experience and a certain amount of accomplishment for that to be taken seriously. Sometimes I feel that is a little bit less if you are a woman kind of making that stand. I just find that sometimes you have to fight a little bit more than you would to come across a certain way, and there's a struggle really. I was reading some really interesting a really interesting book actually called Lean In. I don't know if you've read it or heard of it.
Sheryl Sandberg.
Sheryl Sandberg, that's correct. And she says part of it is sometimes that we feel like that if we do come across as like, we want to be respected, we want to be credible, we've got all this experience, we can come across as kind of very over, almost too much as a woman, and that we try to downplay our experiences because we want to be liked. And being likeable sometimes clashes with the kind of professional career choices or goals that we want to make. So that's sometimes something that I've heard can be a bit of a barrier, is that you might have a really great idea, or you want to speak up about something at a meeting, or you want to make a change that might be quite radical or do something differently, but because of that fear of, I might come across the wrong way, or you're downplaying your own accomplishments internally. That can sometimes be a barrier to moving ahead.
And I think that's something that it's not just in the tech space, but it's in every industry. It's growing up where boys are told that they are being leaders and they're out there and they've got those leadership qualities, whereas girls are told they're bossy.
Exactly.
And those perceptions stay with you as you go through your career. And that's, I think, getting to the root of the problem, it's to do with how we raise our children.
Yes, absolutely.
And how they're taught in schools, things that the things that their teachers tell them as well.
Absolutely. I've got one of my friends is a teacher actually, and one kind of positive thing that she's doing, which is quite inspirational at her school, is they organise a feminist week where the boys and the girls, they will help define what feminism is to them. And they came up with a really good sentence, I think it was last year, where they described feminism as harnessing the full potential of humankind, which I thought was such a cool way of putting it. Yeah. Really short, to the point, all-encompassing as well, because it's not just about women, it's women and men, and I really like that. So yeah, starting at schools I think is really important.
Yeah. And it's showing young boys that it is something that is important for them as well, and getting them involved early on means that they'll probably grow up not knowing or not taking advantage of the gap between men and women. So yeah, that's something that I've written down in my notes, is that it's not just about women fighting all the time. We need men as well. They need to understand that it can massively benefit them to have women in the room.
Absolutely. And a lot of the time I think it's such an unconscious bias, because I know I'm guilty of it as well. It's just kind of, as you say, because it comes from such a young age and is so deeply rooted, it can be very hard to sometimes realise when you're doing it. I read something not too long ago. It was called like the Heidi Howard experiment. I don't know if you've heard about it. It was where they it was at a university in the business school. They did an experiment where they presented the case of a young entrepreneur who'd risen to success in a short amount of time, and they told one half of the students the story that this person was called Heidi, and they told the other half of the students that this person was called Howard. And at the end they had to write up a report on this person's accomplishments and also how they felt about them as a person, their personality. And the students rated their accomplishments the same, which makes sense because it was the same story. But when it came to looking at their likability and kind of how they thought they would get on with them, they all said for Heidi that it sounded like she was hard work, or she was difficult, or they wouldn't want to work underneath her, whereas for Howard they didn't have that at all. So men and women unconsciously kind of you make those judgments without even thinking about it, based on the kind of the same layout.
And I think there is a bit of a perception that the higher up in an organisation you go, the more hostile the women can be.
Yes.
And it's something that I've experienced a few times, because they've worked so much harder to get there, and they're exposed to being the only woman in a room full of men. It's like they want to keep that title.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. It's because we have, I think, the perception of that a woman should be kind of nurturing, or not have the kind of decision-making or competitive traits that commonly come associated with leadership. If someone has gotten to that role, you will make those perceptions of like, oh yeah, they can't get on with them, or they're bossy, as you said, or difficult, and it can be quite negative.
So getting into what we can do to improve things, which is always a topic when you're talking about women in tech. Is there anything that TOPdesk are sort of currently doing? You said that the gender balance or gender isn't really an issue, but is there any external projects or anything like that?
We're really lucky at TOPdesk. We've got some really kind of strong female role models that we're always kind of like promoting, and I feel I can look up to, which I think for my own personal development has been really helpful. Having almost like a kind of mentor that you can look to, that can go to with questions and kind of help you a little bit, but that also stands coming, being a fellow woman as well, the struggles you come up against, that can be very, very useful. I've seen as well in this isn't necessarily within the tech industry as such, but amongst my friends we're always kind of like highlighting areas that we can kind of help bolster things for our, you know, not necessarily, you know, our own companies, but any company really. And I had a really nice example of one of my friends who actually work in the engineering industry noticed that a handbook or a manual that they were following referred to every single pronoun was male. It was always he does this, or then his concrete, or his beam, or whatever the engineering manual was, and actually wrote to the communications team who created the manual and said, actually, you know, if we were trying to encourage more women to get into this industry or in STEM in general, having these kind of uninclusive pronouns can be really damaging. It'll make you feel like you don't belong as a woman reading that. So just flagging little things like that, you know, not trying to be disruptive or, you know, get, you know, under you know, against anyone as such, but just bringing those to attention, I think, would be really positive ways that you can make a change.
Yeah, but it's not always something that people pick up on.
No, not at all.
I was reading the Google SRE essays, and one of the first things I was reading, it's like storytelling, it gives you examples, and it was listing, I think it was the incident management process or something very similar, and it detailed different women trying to solve the issue. And I was like, okay, quite a few female names in here, pretty good. And then it was only resolved by a man.
Really?
Yeah. And my colleague, who coincidentally was a man, was reading it, and he didn't see any issues with it. He was like, but there's a lot of the women here, it's good representation. I'm like, yeah, but it's also sort of implying that women can't fix it.
Yeah.
And not everyone would see it that way.
Yeah.
Not everyone would pick up on it, but I think I was just in one of those mindsets where I was like, this is discrimination.
Yes. Sometimes when you're looking at it, though, it's amazing what you find. And, you know, it is easy to, like, not see things if you're not in that mindset, but actually there's quite a lot of things out there where, like, oh my goodness, you know, there's a blatant example of something that we could change.
Yeah, it's hard to shift mindsets, though, and really teach people how to find these things, because if you're not used to doing it, then it can be something that people struggle to do. Do you have any sort of advice for women looking to get into tech?
The advice, I think, as you said before, needs to start almost like so early, because I saw a really sad statistic where I think it was 3% of people, or of people in general considering technology to study or to go into career, only 3% of women would even think of that as an option. And so, you know, if you're advising people at that point where they're considering whether to go into tech, it's almost too late. They've almost made that decision already that tech isn't for them either, because it's, you know, maybe they feel like it's too male dominated, or whatever their reasons are. They've already made that decision. So I'd love to kind of start advice even earlier and kind of try and get people into it in schools more, try and get people really excited about the technology industry, because there's so many cool things happening in there. There's no reason why boys and girls shouldn't be really enthused to pursue it as a career.
Yeah, and I think I read an article that said that we need to show that tech can be more creative.
Yes.
Because that aspect appeals to young girls a lot more.
Yes.
And that boils down to the way we teach IT or any sort of tech subject. And I think by the age of 15, it's a massive amount of girls that have already decided that tech isn't for them.
That doesn't surprise me.
It's so young to rule it out as a potential career, and I think I did.
Yeah.
Like, I was a bright, not to brag, but I was a bright child, and I loved IT and I loved the sciences, but I just ultimately decided that STEM subjects weren't for me. And look at me now.
Back right in the heart of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think that's why, as we were saying before, so many people just fall into it because they don't choose to go on that path. They think it's not for them, and then they end up there and they're like, oh, actually this is actually quite a cool place to be. So
yeah. Something else when I was doing research on this topic that cropped up is that typically you expect boys to perform better in STEM subjects, but girls are outperforming boys at A-level, and even though it's drastically unbalanced, the percentage of girls that are getting A stars is a lot higher than boys.
Yes.
And I wonder if that's something to do with the perception that girls can't do tech, so the girls that do it work a lot harder.
Quite possibly, if they feel that they're kind of not in their comfort zone compared to their male counterparts, perhaps they're pushing themselves to go that extra mile.
Yeah.
It's interesting as well, it's probably that the girls and the women who take those subjects, they probably wouldn't think that of themselves. I think I was reading something recently where they did some research and they polled a series of medical students on a recent exam that they'd taken, and the actual results was that the women, similar to what you said, had outperformed the men on every category of the exam, whereas when they asked the students how they'd done, the men all thought they'd done a lot better and the women all thought they'd done a lot worse than they actually had. So perhaps it is that perception of having to catch up and kind of thinking that you're not really in the place that you're meant to be, or that there isn't space for you, that you have to work extra hard.
And it goes back into what you were saying earlier about underplaying your abilities.
Yes.
And I think that also affects women when applying for jobs, because another favourite statistic of mine is that a woman will apply to a job if she meets 80 to 100% of the requirements, whereas men will apply if they meet about 60.
Yes, I love that statistic. I find it so interesting. I think it goes the same. It's not only for hiring but also promotional activities as well. Usually what we see is men are much more likely to negotiate for their salary, to ask for more based on their potential, whereas I think women will look on their accomplishments, not what they could do, and maybe negotiate less as a result.
Yeah, it's interesting. So we've talked a lot about the industry and what the industry can do, and I want to know what inspires you, and that can just be in general, or it could be as a woman in tech, in your role, but just generally what makes you want to work really hard and succeed?
That's a very good question, a very deep question. I think I predominantly, what gives me energy and drive from my job and what I want to do with it is to feel that I'm helping people or making a difference in some way. And I think the tech industry is good for that because it touches the lives of so many different people. So if I've gone to work and I've felt like I've really improved someone's way of working, or they've managed to have a better day as a result, even if it's because our interaction has been enjoyable, or we've solved a problem and they're like, oh my goodness, this is meant I can save an hour a day of this boring, meaningless task that I had to do before. That's the kind of what gets the satisfaction for me, and being able to pass that kind of help and inspiration on to others. So in some ways that's not necessarily anything to do with the tech industry. It's about like hopefully trying to make a difference, trying to help people. And I think for women especially, if that is something that you're interested in, wanting to help people, maybe that could be a reason why you wouldn't go into tech, because you might think to yourself, oh, it's all coding, or it's all I'm never going to speak to people or interact with people. I'm just going to be at a computer at my desk, and it's so untrue. I speak to different people all the time. It's amazing, all of the different personalities and conversations you can have. So yeah, that's what I particularly like from it. Not tech focused really, but
no, it's still very valid, and I think it's important. We tend to have a lack of role models in this industry.
Yes.
So I think part of addressing that is understanding that there are different roles to be had, and that the aspects of helping people is a massive part of it. I relate quite a lot to that, because in my job the things that I write will hopefully end up helping someone, and it's brilliant to hear those success stories that my work has inspired someone to make a change in their organisation or something like that. So yeah, it's that's something that I relate to, and I think it's a really important thing to understand. So one final question, which is a big question, what do you think the future holds?
Well, I think the future has the potential to be extremely bright. I think the only thing we have to do is to not kind of sit back, if you know what I mean. I've had some comments that we've made so much progress already with kind of women in tech and STEM, and like, look how good it is now, do we need to keep on trying? Can't we just leave it as it is? But I think it's quite a dangerous outlook to have, because we're so lucky to kind of stood on the accomplishments of the people that have come before us. If we don't keep progressing and looking to that future, then it's never going to get any better. And yes, it's a lot better than it was, but there's no reason to hinder progress in any way. So I think we need just to keep pushing it, keep getting more women out there, increase the number of role models, mentorships. I think the future is a bit of an interesting, controversial one. I think a lot of people think the future should be 50-50. There's a lot of talk or a lot of articles that I read where their aim is for 50% split across everything. And for me, it's more about the future holding just the complete and unbiased choice for everybody. Whether that results in 50-50, awesome. For some industries, it might be 60-40 because of the choices around those particular personalities or whoever wants to be there. The future for me would be if gender just wasn't a thing at all. If there could be some, it doesn't even come into it whatsoever, and we don't even have to have that discussion. And I think we can get there if we keep going.
I think something that we need to start involving in these conversations is not just gender, but diversity in general.
Absolutely.
And for me, I would love if the future was to be not just 50-50 split, but a diverse, which I don't think I'd be able to break that down into percentages.
No.
But there's a stat relates to diverse teams more than gender balanced teams, and it's that diverse teams are ultimately a lot more successful in their projects than a team that is filled with experts on a topic.
Yeah.
Because the difference in backgrounds and the different experiences that people have all equate to something much bigger than the sum of its parts. And I think that's where we should leave this, a very hopeful look to the future. Thank you so much for joining me today, Hannah. It's been lovely speaking to you.
It's been great to be here. Thank you for having me.